welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy, a podcast that looks at the inspiration, intention, action, and choices that you can make to bring more joy into your life, into the world, and into other people's lives. This is your host, Paula Jenkins. Welcome to episode 262 here on Jumpstart Your Joy. This week on the show, we're doing a look back episode where I'm looking at one of the most downloaded and most favorite episodes from season 5. And this week, we're taking a look back at the very first episode from season 5, which was all about nonviolent communication with mindfulness specialist Oren Jay Sofer. It was such a treat to have him on the show. Before we get to it, I want to wish you a very warm welcome and say thank you so much for listening in each week and for joining me today. If you want to find out more about the show or about myself, you can find everything over at the website at jumpstartyourjoy.com. And you can find the show notes for this episode at jumpstartyourjoy.com/mindfulness. While you're there, you'll want to make sure and sign up for my 3 Joyful Things newsletter, which goes out each Thursday, and it gives you a really lovely nudge to go check out the latest episode as it gets posted. And it gives you a little bit of the behind the scenes on the inspiration, intention, and action that you can take to bring more joy into your everyday life. And you can find that on the website. It's right there in the very center. And if you missed last week's finale, where I did the top 10 countdown, make sure and tune into that as well. It's episode 261, and you can find it by scrolling back on your podcasting app. I recommend Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can find that on the website as well, jumpstartyourjoy.com. So let's jump into this interview. I really loved being able to speak to Oren Jay Sofer. He is a well-known mindfulness teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center here in the Bay Area. And he's the author of Say What You Mean, which is a book that's all about nonviolent communication. And I know that the principles of this book, of both being mindful and aware of the things that you do and say, along with making it a practice for yourself to lean into finding ways to say things intentionally and nonviolently, both of these things would serve us all so well in the world right now. And so it really was no surprise to me that this was one of the most downloaded and most beloved episodes of season 5. It was also super interesting to me, who would have known back this time last year that we would have been entering into a time frame where we'd have a pandemic and have so many things going on in our world and our lives that would really be a challenge for many of us in a mental health capacity. I think it also speaks to that piece of it, that this became one of those things that's a touchstone that people can go back to and think about mindfulness in a new way and practice it here and now, because so many things are such a challenge for us as we go through our day-to-day. And so let's get on to this show. Here's the interview with Oren Jay Sofer. Welcome to the show. This week, I'm so very excited and honored to have Oren Jay Sofer, the author of Say What You Mean, on. Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy, Oren.
Hey, Paula. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
It's a treat. Thank you. The thing that I ask everybody at the front of the show is, would you tell us what you loved most as a child or in school? What were your earliest sparks of joy?
What a beautiful question. Yeah. Nature has always been a real high point for me. In fact, I tell a story sometimes about a particular memory that I have as a kid, as a small child, that later in life I connected to kind of setting me on my path to be doing the work that I'm doing today. So I was lying on my back. In our backyard, there were some hemlock trees and pine trees in our backyard. So it was all kind of pine needles. Just lying on my back, not doing anything the way kids are great at doing. Today as adults, we need to actually work to achieve a state of non-doing. Just lying on my back, looking at the sky. And it was a really clear day, blue sky with some clouds. And I remember looking up and having the insight, wow, clouds move. And it was this profound moment of understanding, like, the pictures that I had seen in picture books or looking at the sky for a moment, that it's actually changing, that it's actually moving, which, as anyone who's done any contemplative practice or looked inwards knows, like, that's such a powerful insight about our lives as human
Yeah.
beings, not just on the conceptual level, but to actually experience it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm struck by like kind of the visual of clouds moving is very much what I was taught to kind of think of around centering prayer, which is also a centering meditation. And it's one of the versions of it is looking down from a mountain and seeing your thoughts as clouds and just letting them pass.
Right.
So it's like, that's beautiful.
Yes.
Like that kind
Yeah.
of parallel. I don't know if that's what you were kind of hinting at.
No, absolutely. And there's a very similar analogy in Tibetan Buddhism that, you know, the mind is like the sky, open and vast and clear, and thoughts and emotions are like clouds that just come and go, passing through our awareness. And the tendency we have as human beings is to focus on the content of our experience, on what's happening, whether it's internally, our own thoughts and emotions, or externally, the events of our life. And we tend to miss the process. We tend to miss the space within which everything is happening, whether that's the space of our own heart or the clarity of our mind.
It's amazing there that you talk about that pause and the process and the space being part of communication as well. Your book is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
We often don't slow down enough to pick it up. Before we go there, would you explain what it is that you do now and where you are today?
Absolutely. So, I love the opportunity to just articulate this even for myself, because it's always kind of evolving given the times that we're living in and the sorts of challenges that we're facing as a species on the planet and in our governments and societies, all of the difficulties that we have the opportunity to engage with and support. So I teach people to quiet themselves in order to look inside and have more clarity, purpose, and meaning in their lives. And then I also teach people how to take that sense of clarity, purpose, and meaning internally, and live in a way that is deeply connected to that, particularly in their relationships and conversations and work. So, you might, if you were to frame it in questions, you would say, how do I get in touch with my deepest values and what's most true in myself and in being alive as a human being? And then how do I align my life in that way so that my relationships, my conversation, and my work are reflecting those values? And so that's kind of the themes, you could say, or the structure, and then the content or the practice. So I teach insight meditation and mindfulness meditation, and I teach communication and the intersection of those two, how our inner awareness can inform and deepen our relationships and conversations, so we have more meaningful and effective conversations in life.
I really enjoyed how your book pulls that all apart and lets the reader look at the pieces of communication and what's going on for them internally. Because I think and you bring this up in your book, we are so often imprinted on as we grow up. I think maybe you have a more elegant word for it, but like how we come into the world and we just learn a communication style, but it's very rare that we slow down to think about how that works or where our reactions are coming from.
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, we all have a lot of conditioning around the ways we communicate, and it's fascinating to even contemplate that the words that you and I are even using right now, and the fact that even anyone can understand what we're saying, is because language is an inherited phenomenon. None of us create the language that we use. It's a cultural phenomenon, and it's something that we pick up and learn from our family, our culture, our society, and so it carries with it history. It carries with it the history of human relationships, the history of exploitation, the history of oppression, the history of art, of culture. All that is embedded in the language that we use. And so as we grow and come to consciousness individually of our own place in the world, we start to recognize that some of the things perhaps that we've picked up along the way, views, assumptions, embedded ways of looking at the world or relating to ourselves or others, actually don't serve us. that they're actually just old patterns from the past. And so the great gift of having access to these practices is that we can change and transform those patterns.
One of the bases of your book is around mindfulness. And I wonder if maybe you could explain how you interpret that, or like how that plays out and how you see it. Because I think mindfulness is one of those words that's kind of maybe loaded or slightly overused in some contexts right now. And so would you give us the kind of the lay of the land of what you mean when you say mindfulness?
Sure. Yeah, I so appreciate your acknowledging that. Yeah, the word has been used so much. It's a subject to concept creep, I think, is the phrase, where, a concept sort of gets wider and wider and sort of loses its meaning because now it means anything and everything. So mindfulness is an innate quality that we all have as human beings. It's the ability to pay attention and be aware of what's happening in the present moment in a balanced way. So mindfulness has these two components of present time awareness. We know what's happening. We're not lost in thought. We're not spinning in the past or the future. But the other key component is it's not just about attention. It's not just about knowing what's happening. It's actually a particular kind of relationship to our experience. So our mind is balanced. There's a clarity that's not distorted by bias. So we're not seeing through the lens of the past or the lens of our preferences and conscious or unconscious biases. We're more and more approaching a clear, direct experience of life and what's happening. So this is a very powerful capacity that we have as human beings, directly connected to things like the scientific method, the ability to observe something and learn and study it, to put aside our assumptions and past ideas about whatever that phenomenon is. And it's deeply connected to our inner life, our ability to understand ourselves, to start to get some clarity and perspective on the emotions and the stories we tell ourselves and the sense of identities that we carry. And in the context of communication and our relationships, mindfulness is the foundation. One of the things that I teach is that communication, the currency of communication, is understanding. Right? When we communicate, essentially we're sending and receiving messages. And when a communication is effective, understanding occurs, right? That cycle of sending a message gets completed. The recipient on the other side receives the message accurately. So that's communication. So if we want to communicate, if we want to actually understand one another, the first and most fundamental condition that needs to be in place is awareness. We need to be present. Otherwise, we're not going to understand anything. We're just going to be distracted, or we're going to be filtering everything through our own ideas and assumptions.
Yes. And I think that's so powerful. I mean, I know just even in conversation with my husband, there's oftentimes things that come up, and both of us are filtering through our own experiences and even preconceived ideas of what the other person means.
Exactly.
And then it becomes really hard to have a conversation that feels like we're coming at it from a place of being non-attached, maybe. I'm not sure if that's how it goes.
How about this? What about openness and love?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That sense of like, who is this person that I wake up next to every day, and how can I share my life in a way with you? That's for onward leading for both of us and nourishing.
Yes.
So let's kind of take this the next step. And so you speak to this reality that for all of us, because of the way our minds work, right? We are learning machines, and we learn based on patterns. We're not machines, but we're learning organisms.
Yes.
And one of the ways that we learn is by studying patterns. Yes. And so we carry those templates and patterns into the present moment and then filter things through them. It's a very useful function that the mind plays. But as you point out, sometimes they're not accurate.
Mhm.
So the two keys here. So number one, even though I teach mindfulness and teach mindfulness meditation and mindfulness retreats and mindful communication and all of that, the word that I prefer to use, and you know this from having read my book, is
Mhm.
presence.
Right.
And I choose that word because for me, mindfulness sounds really heady and mental.
Mhm.
Now I've got to think about something, or I've got to be kind of up here in my head observing something that's out there or somehow separate from me. Whereas that word presence for me, it connotes being in my own body, really living in my own skin and feeling life, really
Yeah.
being connected deeply to what's happening. And that's actually what mindfulness is about. It's not so much a cognitive experience as it is a felt and lived experience where we're in the flow of our life, knowing, sensing, tasting what's happening directly without flipping out or getting spun around by it.
Right. And you, in other places in your book, is that the same as activated? Like you feel triggered in some way, or is that a slightly different thing?
Well, activation can happen
Mhm.
that's kind of just sort of how our nervous system works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and presence or mindful awareness is going to be what lets us notice or be aware that activation is
Right.
happening. So what you're pointing to, Paul, is the next step that I was going
Okay, good.
to share.
I
Yeah,
was
no,
going to
we're
say,
totally
please continue. Yeah.
yeah, we're totally in tune here. So,
Awesome.
so you talked about whether it's a colleague or a relative or our spouse or kid or loved one. Sometimes we come to the moment with a certain expectation, and they're saying something or doing something, and we're receiving it in a way that's not intended because we're reacting based on something from the past. That's a filter or that we're carrying.
Hmm.
The beauty and the power of mindfulness and presence is that it doesn't mean being calm and grounded and, sort of this fiction of a perfect person all of the time. Not at all. What it means is that we're aware and connected to whatever is happening. So in the moment of having that reaction where we get triggered, and so I was just thinking of uh, one of the things that my partner and I are working on right now. She lives from her heart.
Hmm.
She's a chaplain. She works in a hospital. She's meeting with
Mm.
people who are seriously ill, families in crisis every day, and she just her way of relating and connecting to the world is through the heart. That's
Yeah.
why it's why I love her, and I have that capacity. I feel my heart, but it's not it's not my default.
Hmm.
My default, for whatever reasons, nature nurture, is the intellect and my body.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we're working on is meeting her needs for connection and intimacy more regularly, so that I'm kind of dropping into that space of being in the heart more, and she feels more seen and connected. So sometimes what happens is when she's not feeling that experience that she wants, and she lets me know because it's painful for her, sometimes it comes out with a little bit of reactivity or frustration or blame or anger. Not overt, but that sense of like, Oren, you're doing it wrong, kind of. Like,
Yes.
how come you're not here with me? Where are you? Right.
Right.
So in my better moments, I'm able to just hear that and go like, oh, sweetie, okay, yeah, you really want to be connected. Sure. And I can shift.
Hmm.
But of course, sometimes that hurts for me. And so I carry a little bit of reactivity around that. So the other day, last night, we went out, we had a meal, and we went to see a movie. And at one point, she, expressed that desire for connection. And she wasn't feeling angry or reactive at all. But that's how I heard it. There
Hmm.
was, because I was kind of primed to expect it and feel a little defensive. But what the practice of mindfulness does is, as that reaction came up, I missed that moment. I didn't catch it right away. My response was a little bit sort of bristly. I don't even remember what I said, but there was a little defensiveness there. And she was present enough to kind of not take the bait and not get
Hmm.
reactive. And she just kind of looked at me and said like, I'm not upset. And in that moment, I was then able, with awareness, with presence, to just feel the reaction.
Right.
To be aware of it, hold it with mindfulness, feel it in my body, and then it's no longer running the show.
Right.
And that's the power of practicing with presence. So the sort of whole framework of my communication method that I teach, the first foundation is learning how to lead with presence.
Right.
And that's that sense of being really aware and connected to ourselves, so that whatever's happening, whether we're anxious, defensive, scared, vulnerable, we can still be authentic. We can have that experience without letting it determine how we respond or engage. And the core principle here, this is the last thing I'll say, is that the more aware we are in our life and our relationships, the more choice we have.
Right.
When we know what's going on, we can start to navigate, steer, and make different choices. And so that's one of the main things presence does for us.
Right. And thank you so much for sharing that. I deeply appreciate it, because obviously this is what you do. and that you're still in the practice of it, I think is like, it adds this layer of, it's not like it's one and done. Like it's something we're all going to practice and be great at some moments, and then also catch ourselves in other moments that, like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to get back in this other space. Because I think that's the thing is that I feel sometimes in my own communications is that I have to be perfect all the time at it. But of course that's not also achievable, really.
Yeah. No, it's not. And
Nor the goal.
Right, exactly. It sets us up for a whole lot of struggle and frustration and disappointment when we have those kinds of unrealistic expectations. And even when we've really gotten to some level of mastery with these skills, and I have many, many colleagues who have been doing this training, as long and longer than I have. And the reality is that we can't control the world. We can't control other people. So having these tools doesn't mean that we'll never have another argument, that we'll never have another fight, that everyone's always going to like us or, approve of everything we do. It means that when those difficulties arise, as they inevitably will in life, that we have the skill to meet them with grace, that we don't need to get thrown off balance or strung out or down on ourselves or panic when there's a conflict or a disagreement, or, we screw up, we do something that has a negative unintended effect on someone. Right. Fine, no worries. That's part of life. It's like, I can hear that. I can receive that. I can be present for you and show up, take responsibility, and move forward together. That's what these tools give us, is the capacity to really have that confidence and flexibility to meet what's happening regardless of the conditions inside or outside.
I don't know that this is specifically in your book, but something that just comes up for me right there is I'm also a life coach. And one of the things I know that comes up for clients often is they've had the conversation that's really difficult, or they've felt anger come up in some way. And then I know people have said, and then they find themselves ruminating, and they can't let go of the moment, and they're unpacking it constantly.
Yeah.
What do you have thoughts or suggestions? How do we be present with that and maybe give it the space it needs so it doesn't take over the day or whatever?
Totally. Yeah, no, that's a skill that that all of us can benefit from developing and honing. So there's a few different things that come to mind. So the first is depersonalizing that situation, or let's say it this way, depersonalizing that pattern or that habit, and recognizing we all do that, and it's
right,
and we do it for a good reason. Right? That the pattern of rumination is part of the negativity bias. It's part of our evolution, whereby, and many people are familiar with this, whereby, the humans in the wild who survived were the ones who were slightly paranoid and anxious because they were always on the lookout for danger. Right? It's like the person who comes to a rock in the path and says, last time I was here, there was a snake behind that rock. There's probably no snake today.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who are going to survive. The one who survived is the one that freaks out and says, oh my God, there's that rock. There's probably a snake there. So that tendency to be on the lookout for threat and danger and to replay perceived threats and difficulties is part of what kept us safe when we were living in touch with the elements more directly. So I always want to frame things that way, because it's easy to get down on ourselves. Like, why am I such a nutcase? Why am I such a stress case? Just relax.
Yeah.
And recognizing this is not personal. It's just what the mind does. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's a range of tools, and it really depends on kind of how bad it is and what's happening. So I'll just kind of simplify it and break it down and say that you're either going to want to, one, do whatever you need to get your mind off of whatever that is you're tripping on so that you can come back to balance. And then two, eventually shift your attention into your body so you can feel what's actually happening. So let me unpack each of those a little bit. So then I'll do it in the reverse order for some reason. It's just going to make more sense that way. So when we're tripping out on a certain thought, when we're worried about something, we keep replaying a conversation that happened or imagining a conversation that we're dreading.
Yes.
The thoughts are just the tip of the iceberg. So part of what's happening is that there's an emotion that's driving those thoughts. And there's a certain kind of pattern of activation, of sympathetic activation, as sort of this energy that's stimulated in our body to protect us. So the fix, the resolution doesn't come from thought. If it did, none of us would waste any more time worrying about things, because we would have figured it out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So thinking just goes on. That's its nature. It doesn't actually resolve. In order for that pattern to resolve, we need to bring our attention into our body and begin to feel the energy that's present. And I don't mean that in kind of any sort of like woo-woo spiritual way. I mean, literally, the heart is racing. There's tension in the muscles. The temperature of the body might be slightly increased. What's happening is that our nervous system is mobilizing resources to meet some kind of perceived challenge. Mm-hmm. So we need to, one, feel that energy in the body, and then two, feel any emotions that are happening, that are moving. And what that does is now we're getting below the surface. We're actually in touch with the rest of the iceberg that's driving those thoughts. Right. And then we can begin to allow some of that energy and some of those emotions to dissipate by not feeding them, but just feeling them.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to get to. Now, what happens a lot of the time is that we're a little bit too wound up or too reactive. We're getting caught on something. And if we try to feel it, we try to feel the emotion, we try to notice the, sweatiness or the tension or the jitteriness in our body, it's just like it amps up even more. Mm-hmm. So in that situation, if there isn't enough balance and presence in the mind and body, then the most useful thing to do is to actually consciously and intentionally put your awareness someplace else. This is called skillful distraction. It's not about avoidance or suppression. It's about creating the conditions for our nervous system to gain enough perspective and balance so that we can then later come back to actually metabolize what's happening. And so for each of us, that might be something different. Social connection is great. Call a friend, talk to someone. Nature, go look at the sky, take a walk, put on some music. Sometimes food can be very grounding. Eat a little bit, get into your body more, do some exercise. Anything that takes us out of our head and back into the present moment and the sensory world.
Right, because that gives you kind of a little way maybe to process it if you're calling a friend as well, but also it takes you from the moment of whatever the thing was or that you're worried about,
right,
and gives you more of a contact here in the now.
Exactly, and it takes us out of that internal imaginary world where everything is falling apart and we're just completely consumed by our thoughts and projections and memories, and puts us back in touch with reality.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Totally.
And I know also from experience that lots of times it's kind of scary to get into the realm of the emotions of it, because that means you have to be with them. And that can be a frightening experience of how long will it go and how long will I be sad or angry or whatever. But yeah, it's,
it is. And, I think that when we start to understand the way emotions work, that fear response begins to dissipate. Because the fear that I'm going to be sad forever, I'm going to be angry forever, that's the trick that emotions play on us, is that when we feel a certain emotion, it seems like it's going to be that way forever.
yeah.
Right? Like when we're depressed, it's not like, oh, I'm probably just going to be depressed for a little while and then it's going to get better and things will change. It's like,
Right.
That's not how we view things when we're depressed. The whole world becomes that.
Yeah.
And it's like, change.
Well, it's so interesting right there, because I think, and kind of to go to the joy kind of space of the show even, it's interesting that we would think that anger or sadness or depression, medically defined depression is maybe a little different, but that we can never stay in joy. I mean, we can stay in contentment and happy, but like joy is fleeting. So it's interesting that, and we know that, and we accept that, but then to think, oh, well, anger, no, but that's going to stick around forever.
Right.
Like even the logic of that, it feels kind of funny to me. I don't know why.
So, I mean, what we're talking about is also another core part of having better conversations and more meaningful relationships, which is that we need to, and kind of this, one of the applications of presence is, right, we need to be able to handle our own emotions in order to, navigate choppy waters in life. And one of the key things that presence does for us there also is it increases our capacity to be with discomfort. Right. And one of the reasons we end up saying things that we regret or making a big mess in a relationship is that when we experience an uncomfortable emotion, it reaches a certain threshold that we can't tolerate. And so presence gives us that space inside to do what we need, to take a deep breath, to slow down, feel your body. And all of these are really concrete tools that we can use to have more traction in a difficult moment with someone so that we don't end up making things worse.
Yes.
These are some of the tools that I teach people to learn how to lead with presence, is the power of something as simple as a pause, half of a breath, even just a few beats before you say something. Do I really want to say this? What's my purpose? Is this going to be helpful? Just that moment to gather your thoughts and consider, where do I want to come from? What's going to be most useful right now? Slowing down the pace of your speech is a really great way to buy yourself some time and also to regulate your nervous system. Because our speech is connected to our breath, when we slow down the pace of our speech, we have to breathe a little bit more slowly, and that's naturally calming for the body. And then feeling any kind of physical sensation, whether it's your feet or your hands, or if you're sitting on a chair, that tends to ground us as well and provide a little bit more stability if things get intense or difficult.
One of the examples that you gave in the book was when and if someone notices that they're feeling that kind of racy feeling all up in their head, or they've jumped to the absolutes of never, always, and they're about to say something, is that you can buy yourself that time and that pause. Even, I think you said one man even would take to kind of like dropping his keys or his change on the floor. So there's like a literal pause built in. Yeah. So everyone kind of has to shift.
Yeah, we can get creative with it, right? Like there are those ways of taking a pause internally, but then there's the most common way of doing it is just literally saying something to the other person, like, I'm not sure, let me think about that for a moment, right? Or I think I just want to take a pause for a sec before I respond, So depending on the context, finding a way of saying that is culturally and socially appropriate. Another strategy when you can't seem to find the words is just excusing yourself to go to the bathroom. No, it's really inappropriate to comment when someone goes to the bathroom. Like, why are you going to the bathroom? No one says that. It's just understood. So if you're in a meeting, it's getting heated, just, excuse yourself, go to the bathroom. You can collect your thoughts there. Or, the kind of humorous example you gave of actually literally making a distraction or something.
Yeah.
That's kind of when all else fails.
Right. Well, and one of the things that strikes me is this all seems very like, oh yes, this is good and sensible. What is it? Why is it that maybe this isn't something that comes natural? Like, why is this not something we naturally go to?
So this is a good moment to mention Marshall Rosenberg, who's the founder of Nonviolent Communication, which is the communication technique that I'm trained in and that I teach, and is kind of the basis of the communication tools that I integrate into meditation and contemplative practice. So Marshall Rosenberg, Dr. Rosenberg, used to say it's very important to be clear and not confuse what's natural with what's habitual. And I think it would be, and you kind of, I think intuitively were sensing this in the way you asked the question, I think that what would be more accurate to say, or maybe I should put it this way, what my belief or my view is that the sort of competitive, adversarial ways that most of us have been trained to communicate, whatever side of the equation you're on, whether you're on the aggressive side or the defensive side, or that side that says, okay, I'm just going to disappear, I'm just going to say yes, I don't want to make waves.
Right.
This whole paradigm of win-lose, either or, we're separate and there's not enough, and therefore we need to fight to make sure that I get my way. That's based on a whole worldview and a whole way of relating that is habitual, that we have learned through repeated experience.
Yes.
And so my view is that what's more natural for us is actually to be compassionate and to work together, right? Like no child is born hating people that are different than them, right? That's learned. Hatred is learned. Separation is learned. We're born with innate curiosity, a desire to learn about the world, and a deep sense of connection to our caregivers and to the world around us. And so based on the experiences we have, we then develop those patterns. So I think that's why this doesn't come more, quote, naturally. It's right. Because we've all been sort of molded and shaped through the socialization process to think and speak and act in certain ways. And so the process is one of unlearning those patterns and having different experiences. Like we don't trust these tools maybe initially until we begin to have some success with them. And it's a long road, and it's like you build one little success on another. But I think that each of us has had the experience, at least somewhere along the way in our life, of having a disagreement, a conflict, a fight with someone. Whether it was a friend, a family member, even a colleague. And for whatever reason, we were able to work it out. We talked it through. Maybe we got a little heated, but in the end, we were able to hear each other. And when that happens, the result is that we grow closer. That relationship strengthens. There's more trust and stability because we learn, oh, wow, we can actually get through something difficult. So now I can actually trust you more to disagree. And so what we're doing with these tools is we're starting to study what are the conditions that allow us to have those kinds of more collaborative, creative conversations where we come through to the other side. And instead of it just being random, we learn to enhance and create those conditions in our lives more. And so the first prerequisite that we've already sort of touched on is presence, showing up, right? Otherwise, we're just on automatic. The second is our intention. Where are we coming from? And a lot of the times we're not even really aware of our intention in a conversation, but this is a huge determinant of where a conversation or a relationship will go. And the more we can choose consciously and intentionally a clear and helpful orientation or motivation in the conversation, that's going to start to shape the whole atmosphere, the whole space of
Right.
what's happening. And whether it's curiosity or being patient or being authentic, all of these are much more helpful intentions than our default to defend ourselves or judge or win or prove a point.
Yeah. I remember one difficult work situation where one woman and I think some of it was roles and responsibilities weren't clearly outlined, and probably then we both bring our own filter to what that means when we communicate not so well. And we just decided we're going to Starbucks and we're working this out. Like, we can't keep going on where we both feel angsty all
Yeah.
day. So
Yeah.
we're going to work this out. I mean, what it did show us is we can.
Yeah.
And it ended, with kind of grateful tears and a hug, and then this renewed sense of like, hey, we can conquer anything. And then that
Beautiful.
formation was, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And it was vulnerable. And I think we both were like, I cannot believe we
Yes.
did that. But then
Yeah.
it led to this, like, we've got each other's backs, which then really increased the whole team's ability to have flexibility and like trust. Like, it just set this interesting thing afloat for everyone when we were finally able to find the space where we could communicate, and we didn't have to be upset.
Yeah.
Which seems silly, but it was like kind of amazing, and I'm glad we did it.
Yeah. And one of the things you're pointing to there, Paula, I think, which is so huge, particularly for our professional life, is if we can't do that, like if we can't tolerate difference and conflict and disagreement, we limit severely the amount of creativity and teamwork and synergy that can happen. It's like we need to be able to go outside of the box, to be in that creative dynamic tension where we're disagreeing and seeing things from different points of view and holding different values in order to have a wider playing field, whatever the arena is. One of the things that you said, if I can just kind of build on and maybe,
of course, yeah,
maybe slip in a couple more tools here. And you said when you sat down with that colleague, there was that sense of like, hey, if we can do this, we can do anything. These two foundations that I've mentioned so far of presence, of like just really showing up, with another human being, one, and two, having a clear and helpful intention. The default one that I encourage is curiosity and care.
right.
Just the genuine intention to understand. We can go a really long way in a conversation with those two. If we do nothing else, if we learn how to be present and how to come from an intention to really try to understand someone and to help them understand us, to build that connection, that can take us a long distance. I want to share like maybe two other tools from the whole third foundation that I teach, which is focus on what matters.
Yeah, I would love that. Yes.
How do we get to what's actually most important instead of getting sidetracked in the details, instead of getting caught up in our judgments and our worries, instead of, the sort of petty focus on our ego or identity that can come in.
Right. Or how we've been misunderstood, or how you didn't see me, or
exactly
how that one email was so mean, or whatever it was. Yeah.
Which, there's a time and place for. Those things are valid. And do we lose sight of the big picture?
Right.
Yeah. Even in those instances, are we aware of what matters? Even in that email that was so mean, are we focused on blaming the other person and proving them wrong? Or are we aware of what actually matters, which is, hey, like, I want understanding, or I want to have a relationship where we both respect each other and we can communicate when things go wrong in a way that's onward leading, that moves things forward rather than lays blame. Do we lose sight of the underlying values and objectives in a situation? So the tools here that we can build on to have more meaningful relationships, to have more effective conversations. The first is this skill, really, that I'm pointing to, which is an ability to shift our attention from the specifics of what's happened and our own preferences and ideas for what should be, okay, to use that word, the way we create this idea of, well, this is what should happen or should have happened, or this is what I want to have happen. Can we shift from the what to the why? Why does this matter? What's important here? Because it's at that level of why, the deeper values, objectives, and needs, that we can start to hear one another and work together and get creative. We can argue until we turn blue about what. I think we should do it this way, and no, I think you're wrong, and this other one's going to be better. Right. Until we get to why I think I want to do it this way, and why do you think this other way would be better, we're not actually going to be able to learn from each other and collaborate. So focusing on what matters is a skill that we develop to actually perceive our own ideas and emotions and the statements and experiences and ideas that other people have from the perspective of what's most important, what really matters to this person, underneath what they're saying, underneath even how they're feeling. Are there deeper needs? Are there values? And this is really a language. It's a vocabulary that many of us don't learn, but it's what motivates us. It's what drives us in life. Our longing to contribute, to be valued, our longing for companionship, for teamwork, for partnership, for creativity, self-expression, belonging, kindness, touch, connection, all of these deeper needs that we have as human beings. So one of the things that I really encourage people who want to improve their communication skills to do is to begin to just build a vocabulary for the deeper needs and values that drive you in your life and that you share with other people. And there's a whole needs list that comes out of the nonviolent communication system. And it's maybe at the end we can tell folks that I have free resources on my website from the book that you can download. You can get a list and just start learning that. So that's, if I could only give people one more tool in addition to presence and intention, it would be learn how to focus on what matters. Learn how to identify your own needs and other people's needs.
Yeah, especially the focusing. I don't know if this goes in the same space, but kind of like one of the questions I ask myself is, and not in like a hedonistic way, but like, do I want to be right or do I just want to be happy? Like,
yeah, no, like, totally.
What's at stake here for me being right? I think that might have actually come from Wayne Dyer, but like that kind of question of what's guiding this. If I want to engage with someone at a level, like, does it really matter if I'm right?
Yes, right.
And
exactly.
Oftentimes it doesn't matter at all. It's just that habitual patterning of engaging in that way.
Yeah, and to kind of take what you're saying and then just like, let's apply this tool that I'm suggesting. So being right is a strategy. That's
right. Yeah,
that's an idea that I have in my mind. I should, like, you should acknowledge that I'm right. You should apologize. So what are the needs underneath that? Right. So like, I know for me, when I want to be right, usually I want understanding.
Yeah. I want to be acknowledged that I'm a competent or educated individual. And I know right where that one comes from. I'm very short and I'm often totally terrified that people are taking me as a child or like that I'm not being seen as equal. So maybe that's where that one is. Yeah.
So great. So then what you're touching into that I'm hearing is it's not just acknowledgement. There's competence, a sense of being valued and seen.
Yep.
So when we consider, right, if someone says, no, you're right, how much does that actually meet that need for acknowledgement and being seen and understood, versus someone saying, wow, when you put it that way, here's what I understand. And actually getting to your point of view and letting them know that you understand. It's not about being right or wrong. It's just about the understanding and the acknowledgement for whatever that piece is that you're holding.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so you're totally hitting on exactly the thing. I don't know that I need to be right. I just there is a deep need sometimes to be seen, or at least have presence held for myself from another person that I care about. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that beautiful line from a Rumi poem that you're probably familiar with. It says, out beyond the ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. There's that sense that when we move beyond those fixed notions, a whole world opens up of really a world of our shared humanity.
Yeah.
So
good one.
Yeah, right. It's a good one. It is. That's where I want to live. Yeah. I don't know how much time we have left, Paul, but there's one more tool I want to share with people.
Yeah, let's do that. And then do you have time past one, or do we need to be
It'd be good if we can go a little bit past, but
share, and then we'll jump into your book. And then I usually have a couple questions, but you can probably nail them quick.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Go ahead. So the last tool that I would want people to have, like if this was the only time that we had together, is a very, very specific and concrete way to build the understanding in a conversation. Earlier, we were talking about how understanding is the currency of communication. It's that sense of message sent equals message received. We get that confirmation that someone's really hearing us. So developing your own authentic way of checking that understanding is happening is really important in a conversation. And this is where conversations often break down, is even if we're listening or the other person is listening, we often fail to make sure that the other person feels heard. We don't give them the space or the experience of feeling heard. And that's where the trust is built. It's not just that I'm listening and understanding what you're saying, but it's you as the other person in this conversation feeling heard, right? So there's those two components. There's my understanding, and then there's you trusting that I understand. There's you actually feeling in yourself some sense of relief. Yeah, thank you. You get it. So how do we do that? There's a very simple tool that many of us have probably actually been exposed to, but never quite made our own. And the way it's usually taught is active listening, which I don't really even like that phrase because it implies an artificial technique, which doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
It has to be genuine. And so the move here is in a conversation, whenever there is emotionally charged material, a lot of information, anything complex, or just a sense that the other person is wanting or needing to be heard or understood, or we're wanting to be heard or understood. Being able to share with the other person what it is we're understanding. And the simplest way that I suggest people to do that is to come up with a really short phrase that leads in to your saying back to the person what you've heard. So it could be something like, let me see if I'm following, or I want to make sure I'm understanding. Here's what I'm getting. Tell me if I'm on point. I want to make sure we're on the same page. And so you find your own words for that, and you just start with that short phrase, and then just say back what it is you're understanding. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to agree.
Right.
Really important. We can just tell the other person, here's what I'm hearing, your experiences. Here's what I'm getting is the way you're seeing things. It doesn't mean that I agree. It just means I'm telling you, this is the information that I hear you sharing with me. If we get it right, great. The other person knows we understood. If we don't get it right, the other person will clarify. It's really important for them to know, no, that's not quite it. Let me try again. So this is a very powerful tool in conversations. Initially, it feels like it takes more time and slows things down. And in one way, it does slow things down. That's the point. But in the end, in the long run, it's actually more efficient. Because what we're doing is we're building understanding one step at a time. And then we're not wasting time arguing. We're not wasting time reacting to something the other person didn't really say or intend, but we interpreted or heard. And we're building trust. We're building trust and goodwill in the conversation. And when you're on the other side, when you're the one who's wanting understanding, ask. Say, it'd be really helpful for me just to know if you're getting what I'm saying. Like, what are you hearing? what do you hear matters to me? Or what's the kind of key thing you're taking away from this? And then that gives us that confirmation.
Right. I love it, because that definitely builds in the pause as well. It kind of builds in all of the pieces.
Yeah.
Maybe we're really like desperately desiring, but unless we're a participant in creating it, it kind of gets lost too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's good stuff.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so if anybody wants to find you and your book, or I believe you have a course coming up.
I do. That's right.
Would you let us know where that would be?
Definitely. Great. So if you want to learn more about these tools, I am teaching a 6-week online course. It starts October 17th, and orenjaysofer.com, orenjaysofer.com/online. That'll take you right to the online course. I'm also on social media at Oren Jay Sofer if folks like to hang out there. And the best way to stay in touch, if you want to learn more about my work and get some free guided meditations and other free resources, is to join my monthly newsletter. And I send out a guided meditation or a teaching once a month. And you can sign up right on my website, orenjaysofer.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes. And then I have one last question. What are 3 ways that you can think of to jumpstart joy in your life, in the world, or in other people's lives?
Just hearing that question brings me joy. So I'm going to slip a 4th in, which is ask yourself that question,
I love it. Yeah. Nobody's pointed that out, but it is kind of mindful, isn't it?
Yeah. If we want to experience anything in our life, just kind of asking ourselves, how does this come about? How does this arise? Is a great way to do that. Whether it's patience or integrity or, anything. So, how to jumpstart joy in oneself, others, or the world. So I'm going to take a moment, if I may, and just kind of listen and collect my thoughts here. What comes to mind for me, so the first thing that came to mind to jumpstart joy in oneself, others, in the world, and I think it covers all 3, is find ways to be kind and generous. Give of yourself to others. That's one of the most joyful experiences we have as human beings, is helping one another and giving. It gives us a sense of innate value. It enhances our sense of dignity and self-worth. It deepens social connection, which has been the research has shown is the number 1 predictor for long-term happiness is our level of social connection. So, and that's created and supported by kindness and generosity. So just look, it doesn't need to be big. Just look for small ways to be kind and generous. Smile, hold the door for someone, send an email or a note to someone you haven't talked to in a while, pay for someone's coffee behind you in line. There's all kinds of neat ways to do that. Volunteer at a local organization or shelter. This is one. Then number 2, and I'll frame this in the most broad way, is attune to beauty. We just live in such a remarkable universe, and there's a lot of tragedy and violence and pain, and it's hard. And to stay on track, we need nourishment. And we don't notice the beauty if we don't look for it. And so open yourself and pay attention to beauty. And that appears differently for each of us. For some people, beauty is a beautiful piece of code. For other people, it's the stars in the night sky. For others, it's music or art or, cooking a beautiful meal. So it doesn't matter where you find it, but attune to that. And then the last thing I think is meaning and purpose. Some of the deepest joy I think that we can experience as human beings is the joy of feeling connected to purpose in our lives and knowing that that we are using the precious time and energy that we have in a way that's meaningful. And so that's a journey for each of us. I don't think it's a once and for all, you find it and it's done. But asking that question and looking for it is in and of itself is part of the journey. Yeah, and then the last thing, I know you said 3, and so, but why not go for more? No, I talked to my old high school physics teacher today, and I learned a ton from him in high school, not only about physics but about being human. And I reconnected with him today for a new book that I'm writing, and he taught me something else, and it's one of the areas that I need to grow and learn and develop in. And it's a sign that I didn't think of this first, but I'm so glad it came out, and that's to play more.
Yes.
Play is such a wonderful source of joy. So maybe we'll end on that note.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Oren. This has just really been a treat to get to spend time with you. Thanks for being on our soul.
Likewise. Yeah, you too, Paula.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you want to find out more about this episode, including links to the things that we've talked about, you can find the show notes at jumpstartyourjoy.com, and you can search for this episode right up there in the right-hand corner of the website. You'll find it. While you're on the website, I know you're going to want to sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is 3 Joyful Things. It's where I take a look and give you guys the behind the scenes of what I'm really thinking about with each episode, including the inspiration, intention, and action, along with the choices that you can make in your own life to bring some of the things that each guest or I share into your everyday life. So it's a lot of fun. You can find the sign up for that off the homepage or within the show notes of every episode. And I would love to connect with you. I hang out a ton on Instagram, where my handle is Jumpstart Your Joy. You can also find the Facebook page for this podcast at Jumpstart Your Joy. So I hope you guys will come on back next week. And until then, I hope that your days are filled with so much joy.